My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm 60 years old. If you had told me just 1 month ago that my son was meticulously planning my murder, I would have laughed in your face. I would have told you that the only thing my son was planning was a surprise party for my 40th wedding anniversary. And you know what? He did a beautiful job. I suppose you have to be good at planning to pull off something like that. The party was perfect. It was one of those flawless September evenings in Maple Creek, Ohio, when the air turns crisp and the setting sun casts everything in a syrupy golden light. Our backyard was filled with friends and family, their laughter echoing off the old oak tree Frank and I planted when we first bought the house. My husband, Frank, had spent a week in his workshop, his sanctuary of sawdust and memories, handcrafting these beautiful cedar-serving platters for the occasion. Everything felt solid, permanent. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime of love built piece by piece, just like the furniture in his shop. Our son Caleb and his wife Brooke were the perfect hosts, gliding through the crowd, making sure everyone's glass was full. They always looked the part. Caleb, handsome and confident in the business he'd built, a carpentry business, just like his father's. And Brooke, well, Brooke was immaculate. Always. She wore a simple white dress and a smile that never faltered. She hugged me tightly when she arrived, her perfume smelling like money and lilies. "Happy anniversary, Mom," she'd whispered. "You and Dad are an inspiration." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The main event was the gift. Caleb tapped a wine glass for attention, his arm wrapped possessively around Brooke's waist. "To my parents," he announced, his voice smooth and practiced. 40 years. They built this amazing life from nothing but hard work and love. Everyone applauded. Frank squeezed my hand, his eyes misty. I could feel the ghost of our other son, Leo, in that moment. The ache of his absence never really goes away. It just gets quieter. Frank and I shared a look, a silent acknowledgement of the one person who should have been standing there with us. Brooke handed us a large, elegantly wrapped box. Inside was a high-end digital photo frame, the kind that looks like a piece of art. "We've preloaded it with photos from your whole life together," she said, beaming. "Your wedding, the boys when they were little, everything." It was a thoughtful gift. But then Caleb, still addressing the crowd, said the thing that, looking back, was the first loose thread in the sweater of his lies. He gestured around at our home, the yard, Frank's workshop visible in the fading light. "This is what it's all about," he said with a grand sweep of his hand. 40 years of building. All this hard work, it's an incredible investment, and an investment like this deserves to be protected. At the time, it just sounded like a slightly clumsy, business-like compliment. An investment. Such a cold word for a home filled with so much love. Frank just smiled, proud of his son's supposed success, but I felt a tiny, inexplicable chill. It was the way he said it, with a flicker in his eyes that wasn't nostalgia or love. It was something else, something calculating, the look of a man assessing the value of an asset. I pushed the feeling down, chalking it up to emotion, to the wine, to the bittersweet memory of Leo. I hugged my son, told him I loved him, and thanked him for the perfect party. I had no idea I was hugging a stranger, a man who had already calculated my worth and decided I was worth more dead than alive. That unsettling feeling from the party lingered for a few days, like the faint, unpleasant smell of something starting to turn. I tried to ignore it, busying myself with gardening and sorting through old photo albums from the new digital frame. But it was there, a low hum of anxiety I couldn't quite place. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Caleb and Brooke showed up unannounced. Brooke was holding a small box from the expensive bakery downtown. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd bring you some of that cinnamon coffee cake you love," she chirped, kissing my cheek as she breezed into the kitchen. It was a sweet gesture, but it felt strategic. It was the kind of move you make when you want something. Frank was happy to see them, of course. He was in his workshop, and the unexpected visit pulled him away from his work with a genuine smile on his face. He loved Caleb, and a part of him always seemed to be trying to make up for some invisible deficit, a wound I wouldn't understand the true depth of until much later. We all sat at the kitchen table, the same oak table where I'd helped two little boys with their homework for years, and made small talk about the weather and a new hardware store opening in town. Then Brooke, after taking a delicate bite of cake, set her fork down and placed her hand over mine. Her fingers were cold. "Mom, Dad," she began, her voice shifting into that serious, gentle tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. "Caleb and I were talking after the party, and we were just thinking about how precious you both are to us." I felt my stomach tighten. "Here it comes. You're both over 60 now." Caleb picked up, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. He had his reasonable businessman face on, "and we just think it's important to have everything in order. For your peace of mind." "What do you mean, in order?" Frank asked, still smiling, not yet sensing the shift in the room. "Your will, Dad," Caleb said plainly, "and power of attorney. We were talking to a lawyer friend of ours, and he said it's just the responsible thing to do. If, God forbid, something happened to one of you, it would give the other one, and us, the ability to manage your affairs without any legal headaches." Brooke squeezed my hand. "We worry about you in this big house," she added, her eyes wide with manufactured concern. "We just want to make sure you're protected, that we have the ability to take care of you properly." The word control flashed in my mind, bright and jarring as a lightning strike. I pulled my hand away gently to pick up my mug. "Well, that's very thoughtful of you both," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But your father and I are in perfect health. It feels a little premature." "It's not about today, Mom. It's about tomorrow," Caleb insisted, a hint of impatience coloring his tone. "It's just paperwork. We'd get it all drawn up, make me and Brooke the sole heirs and executors, and give us power of attorney. That way, we can handle the bills, the investments, everything, if you ever need us to." Sole heirs. The phrase hung in the air, erasing the ghost of Leo completely. It felt so final, so clinical. Frank, ever the pragmatist, was already nodding. "You know, he has a point, Ellie. It would be easier. We're not getting any younger." I looked at my husband, this man I had known for over 40 years, and I felt a chasm open between us. He didn't feel it. He didn't sense the subtle pressure. The way their loving words felt like finely woven threads of a net slowly closing around us. He just saw his son, our only son, trying to be responsible. "I don't know," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "It feels like a big step. We've always managed our own affairs." Brooke's beautiful face clouded over with a look of theatrical hurt. "Oh, Mom," she murmured, her voice dripping with sorrow. "Please don't think this is about anything other than love. Don't you trust us?" And there it was. The trap. Any further hesitation would make me the villain, the untrusting mother hurting her children's feelings. It was a perfect piece of emotional blackmail, and seeing it so clearly made my blood run cold. "Of course, I trust you," I lied, forcing a smile. "It's just a lot to think about. Let your father and I discuss it." They left soon after that, their smiles back in place, hugging us both as if they'd just done us the greatest favor in the world. As their car pulled away from the curb, Frank turned to me and said, "They're good kids, Ellie, just looking out for their old folks." But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just been expertly cornered. I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at Frank's workshop, a place of honesty and creation, and felt like our whole life, our entire investment, was in the middle of a hostile takeover. I knew, with a certainty that frightened me, that I needed to talk to someone. I needed to call Sarah. I called Sarah the next morning. My hands were shaking so badly I had to dial her number twice. Sarah and I have been friends since we were 5 years old, building forts in the woods behind my childhood home. She was the maid of honor at my wedding, the godmother to both my sons, and the only person on earth who could tell me I was being an idiot without me getting angry. More importantly, she spent 40 years as a forensic accountant. She can smell a lie on a balance sheet from a mile away. We met at the Daily Grind, our favorite spot downtown. The air inside was warm and smelled of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon, a comforting aroma that did absolutely nothing to calm the frantic hummingbird beating against my ribs. Sarah was already there, sitting in our usual booth with a no-nonsense black coffee in front of her. She has this way of looking at you, a calm, steady gaze that makes you feel like she's seeing right through to the heart of the matter. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, skipping the pleasantries. I slid into the booth opposite her and just let it all out. The helpful suggestion, the pressure to sign over power of attorney, Caleb's strange speech at the party about their home being an investment. I told her about the look of theatrical hurt on Brooke's face when I hesitated, the way her loving words felt like a carefully laid trap. Sarah listened patiently, not interrupting once. She just took slow, deliberate sips of her coffee, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. I felt a wave of self-doubt. Was I overreacting? Was I being the paranoid, untrusting mother they were making me out to be? Finally, she set her mug down with a soft click. "Okay," she said, her voice even. "Let's take the emotion out of this for a second and just look at the facts. Fact 1. Your son, who has never shown this level of interest in your finances before, suddenly wants total control of them." She held up a finger. Fact 2. He's pushing for this aggressively, but he's gift-wrapping it in the language of love and concern to make you feel guilty for saying no. Another finger went up. Fact 3. His wife is his co-pilot in this. This isn't just Caleb, it's a coordinated effort. They've rehearsed this. Hearing her lay it out so clinically, so logically, was like a splash of cold water. It validated everything I had been feeling, but was too afraid to admit to myself. "But why, Sarah?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "They seem to be doing so well. Caleb's business is thriving. They just bought that new Land Rover last year." Sarah leaned back, a skeptical arch to her eyebrow. "Is it thriving, Ellie? Or does it just look like it's thriving? You know as well as I do that people in this town will go into crushing debt to keep up appearances. How much do you really know about his books?" I had to admit, I knew very little. Caleb was always vague about the details, preferring to talk in broad, confident strokes about big contracts and expansion plans. Frank never questioned it. He was just so proud that Caleb had followed in his footsteps. "Let me ask you this," Sarah continued, her tone sharpening. "When was the last time they asked you for money? Not a big loan, just small things. Help with a utility bill? A couple $100s to tide them over until a check clears." I thought back, and with a sickening lurch in my stomach, I realized it had been happening for years. It was always framed so casually. Brooke would call, sighing about how a client was late to pay, and could Frank and I possibly spot them a few $100 to cover the electric bill? They always promised to pay it back, but they rarely did. We never kept track. They were our children, after all. "He's in trouble, isn't he?" I said, the words tasting like ash. "I don't know for sure," Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. "But Ellie, this has all the hallmarks of a classic financial takeover. People get desperate. They feel entitled. They start seeing their inheritance not as a future gift, but as a present-day bailout they have a right to." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand, unlike Brooke's, was warm and strong. "You are not crazy," she said, looking me directly in the eye. "Your gut is screaming at you for a reason. Do not sign anything. Don't give them a single inch. Love doesn't come with a spreadsheet and a pen, Ellie. And it sure as hell doesn't demand you sign your life away." I left the coffee shop feeling both terrified and incredibly clear-headed. The fog of doubt had been burned away by Sarah's cold, hard logic. This wasn't about love. It wasn't about concern. It was a transaction. And as I walked back to my car, a new, even more terrifying question began to form in my mind. If my son was this desperate, what was he capable of doing to get what he wanted? That night, the house felt too big, too quiet. Frank was already asleep, his breathing a steady, rhythmic comfort that offered no solace for the chaos raging in my mind. Sarah's words echoed and re-echoed. "You are not crazy. Your gut is screaming at you for a reason." I couldn't rest. I found myself in the living room, staring at the digital photo frame Caleb and Brooke had given us. It was cycling through our life in silent, cheerful slides. There we were, young and beaming on our wedding day. There was Frank, holding a tiny, bundled-up Leo on the steps of this very house. Then a picture flashed on the screen that made my breath catch in my throat. It was of the boys. Leo was about 17, tall and handsome with that easy smile he always wore. Caleb was maybe 12, standing beside his older brother, looking sullen and resentful, a familiar expression from his early teens. Seeing them together like that, frozen in time, threw open a door to a memory I hadn't thought about in years. A memory I had probably willfully suppressed. Sound fades into a memory. The clatter of plates being set for dinner, the sound of two teenage boys arguing in the next room. It was a Tuesday, just like today. I was in the kitchen making spaghetti, the boys' favorite. Leo's voice, usually so calm, was sharp with anger. "Just admit it, Caleb. You took the money from my wallet. It was $20. "I don't know what you're talking about." Caleb's younger voice shot back, laced with that defiant whine he'd perfected. "Maybe you just lost it. You're always losing things." "I didn't lose it. It was right on my dresser. You're the only other person who was in my room." The argument escalated. I could feel a headache starting to form behind my eyes. All I wanted was a quiet dinner, a peaceful evening. I hated it when they fought. It felt like a failure, a crack in the perfect family portrait I worked so hard to maintain. I walked into the dining room, wiping my hands on my apron. "What is going on in here?" I asked, my voice tight with a forced calm. "Mom, Caleb stole money from me," Leo said, his face flushed with righteous indignation. Caleb immediately turned to me, his expression shifting to that of a wounded victim. "I didn't. He's blaming me for no reason. He's always picking on me." I looked from one to the other, my honest, sometimes too blunt older son, and my younger, more sensitive child who always seemed to be living in his brother's shadow. I didn't want to adjudicate. I didn't want to investigate. I just wanted the fighting to stop. "Leo, it's just $20, I said, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. "I'll give it to you." "Caleb, apologize to your brother for upsetting him. Now, both of you, wash your hands for dinner. I don't want to hear another word about this." Leo stared at me, his mouth agape with disbelief. I saw the hurt in his eyes. He wasn't upset about the money. He was upset about the principle, about the lie. But I had dismissed it. I had dismissed him. Caleb muttered a phony, insincere, "sorry," and scurried off, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He had learned a valuable lesson that day. If you deny, deflect, and play the victim, Mom will make the problem go away. There would be no consequences. Sound of the memory fades, returning to the quiet ticking of the clock. Standing there in my dark living room, the truth of that moment hit me with the force of a physical blow. My desperate need for peace, my absolute avoidance of conflict, had created a vacuum where accountability should have been. How many times had I done that? How many times had I smoothed things over, paid for a broken window Caleb denied breaking, or excused his poor grades by blaming the teacher? I had been a peacemaker, not a parent. I had shielded him from the natural consequences of his actions, all to preserve the illusion of a happy, harmonious home. Frank had been no better, always indulging Caleb with gifts and money, perhaps out of guilt that Leo was so naturally gifted and confident. We had built a soft, comfortable world for Caleb, a world where nothing was ever truly his fault. I sank onto the sofa, the weight of my own complicity pressing down on me. I hadn't pushed my son off a cliff, but I had, in 1,000 small ways, failed to teach him how to stand on his own 2 feet. I had helped create the man in the mirror, a man whose reflection I no longer recognized, a man whose sense of entitlement had grown like a weed in the fertile soil of my good intentions. And now, that weed was threatening to choke us all. The morning after my sleepless night of self-reflection was thick with a silence that felt heavier than any argument. Frank and I moved around each other in the kitchen, making coffee and toast, the unspoken tension a third person at the table. He knew something was wrong, but I didn't have the words yet, or maybe I just didn't have the courage. The push came, as it always did, from Brooke. She called around 10, her voice as sweet and cloying as burnt sugar. I put her on speakerphone so Frank could hear. "Good morning, you two," she chirped. "I hope we didn't overwhelm you the other day. I was just calling because our friend, the estate lawyer, he had a cancellation, and he can see all 4 of us next Thursday at 2. I went ahead and booked it, just to hold the spot. Isn't that great?" I stared at the phone, my blood turning to ice. She hadn't asked. She had told us. She had taken control, scheduling the appointment for our own financial surrender. Frank opened his mouth to say that sounded fine, but I cut him off, my voice sharp and brittle. "We'll have to call you back, Brooke." I hung up before she could reply. "Ellie, what was that for?" Frank asked, bewildered. "That was a good opening, we should take it." That's when something inside me finally snapped. All the fear, the suspicion, the guilt from the night before, it all boiled over. "A good opening? Frank, are you listening to yourself? Our son and his wife are systematically trying to take over our entire life, and you're calling it a good opening." "That's not what they're doing," he said, his voice rising to meet mine. "They're trying to help. Caleb is our son, our only son. Why can't you see that he's just trying to do the right thing?" "Because this isn't the right thing," I shouted, slamming my hand on the kitchen counter. The coffee mugs rattled. "This is a hostile takeover disguised as a hug. You're so desperate to believe he's a good man that you're completely blind to what's right in front of us. You've always done it, always indulged him, always let him get away with everything. Did you ever, even once, make him face a real consequence?" His face hardened. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I shot back, my voice breaking. "Or is it just that you can't bear to look at the truth?" He turned away from me then and walked out the back door, heading toward the one place he always went when he couldn't face the world, his workshop. But I wasn't letting him escape. Not this time. I followed him, marching across the dewy grass, my heart pounding with a fury I hadn't felt in 40 years. I burst through the door of the workshop. The air inside was thick with the clean, sharp scent of pine and cedar. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating dancing motes of sawdust. This was our history. On the wall hung Leo's first clumsy attempt at a birdhouse. On the workbench lay the tools he had learned to use, right alongside the ones Frank still used every day. Frank stood with his back to me, his shoulders slumped. He looked old. For the first time, my husband looked like a frail old man. "Don't you walk away from me, Frank," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "We need to talk about our son." He finally turned, and his face was a mask of such profound pain that it stopped me in my tracks. His eyes were filled with a haunted, cornered look I'd never seen before. "You're right," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I have been blind. I've been a coward." He sank down onto an old wooden stool, running a trembling hand over his face. "You want to know why I indulge him? Why I always give him the benefit of the doubt?" He looked up at me, and his eyes were swimming with tears he'd held back for a quarter of a century. "Because I helped you raise one son, Ellie, and I helped the other one get away with murder." The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, hanging in the sawdust-filled air. Murder. It was an alien word in this sacred space. What are you talking about?" And then he told me. The story came pouring out of him, a torrent of guilt and grief held back for 25 years. He told me about the night Leo died. Leo hadn't gone for a walk. He had come out here, to this workshop, waving bank statements in his hand. He had discovered that Caleb had been stealing from our savings account for months. Leo was furious. Frank choked out, his body shaking with sobs. He was going to confront him. I told him to wait, to let me handle it, but he wouldn't listen. He was so full of integrity, so much like you. He couldn't let a lie stand. Frank told me he'd followed them, a terrible premonition in his gut. He got to the river gorge just in time to see them on the edge of the rocks, screaming at each other. He saw Leo hold up the papers, saw Caleb's face contort with rage. "And then?" Frank whispered, his voice barely audible. "I saw Caleb shove him. It wasn't a stumble, Ellie. It wasn't an accident." He put his hands on his brother's chest, and he pushed. I saw my firstborn son. I saw him fall. I felt the floor of the workshop tilt beneath my feet. I gripped the workbench to stay upright, the rough grain of the wood biting into my palms. "Why?" was the only word I could force out. "Frank, why did you never tell me?" "Because when I scrambled down to the riverbank, Leo was gone," he cried, the words torn from him, and Caleb was just a boy. He was hysterical, sobbing, saying he didn't mean it, that it was an accident. He begged me, "Don't let Mom lose both of us, Dad. Please." And I was weak. My son was dead, and my other son was begging for his life. I made a choice, Ellie. I chose the living son over the dead one. I helped him create the story about a tragic slip, and every day for the last 25 years, that lie has been eating me alive. I looked at the man I had married, the man I had built a life with, and I saw a stranger. My entire life, my entire 40-year marriage, the very foundation of my family, it was all built on a secret buried in the sawdust of this workshop. The betrayal was so absolute, so monumental, that I couldn't even breathe. My son wasn't just a thief, he was a killer, and my husband had been his silent accomplice all along. The workshop, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. Frank sat on his stool, his head in his hands, a broken man. I stood there, utterly numb, the scent of wood and lies filling my lungs. Leo, my beautiful, honest Leo, murdered by his own brother, and his father, my husband, had covered it up. 25 years, a lifetime of grief, all of it based on a monstrous fabrication. My mind raced, not with emotion, but with a cold, terrifying logic. Every memory of Caleb since Leo's death twisted into something sinister. His sudden attentiveness, his forced empathy, his thriving business built on a foundation of stolen money and a hidden crime. It wasn't grief I was seeing in him, it was a performance, a meticulous act of concealment, perfected over decades. He hadn't changed, he had simply become better at hiding the monster within. Then the landline in the house rang, its shrill insistence shattering the fragile silence. Frank flinched. I stared at the door, a sudden, chilling premonition washing over me. We both knew who it was. I walked back into the house on legs that felt like lead, Frank trailing silently behind me. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling. "Hi, Mom," Caleb's voice, bright and utterly devoid of anything authentic, chirped through the receiver. "Were you busy?" "Just talking," I managed, my voice a strained whisper. I glanced at Frank, whose eyes met mine, wide with a shared terror. "Great, listen. Brooke and I had a wonderful idea," he continued, completely oblivious, or perhaps perfectly feigning oblivion, to the storm he'd just unleashed. "We were thinking, for your anniversary, a truly special celebration. You know how much you and Dad always loved those hiking trails around Blackwood Ridge." My blood ran cold. Blackwood Ridge, it was beautiful, treacherous, filled with steep cliffs and deep ravines, a perfect place for an accident. "We could all go next Saturday," he went on, his enthusiasm sickeningly upbeat. "A family hike. We could pack a picnic, take some photos, really make some new memories. What do you say? A perfect day together. Just the four of us. Just the four of us." The words echoed in my head, a macabre parody of family togetherness. The true four of us, a murderer, his accomplice, and their two intended victims. Frank slowly walked over to me, his gaze fixed on the phone. I could see the terror etched into his face, reflecting my own. He understood. He saw the thinly veiled threat in the innocent invitation. It wasn't a spontaneous gesture of love. It was a calculated summons, an execution date. "That's a very sweet idea, son," I forced myself to say, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. My voice was tight, barely under control. "But it's so sudden. We'll have to think about it and get back to you." Caleb's tone shifted, just slightly, a hint of steel beneath the honey. "Oh? I thought it sounded pretty great." Brooke was so excited. "We just want to do something nice for you two. Make sure you're enjoying your golden years, you know, while you still can." The last phrase hung in the air, a venomous promise. "While you still can." "Yes, well," I said, trying to sound casual. "We'll just discuss the details. We'll call you tomorrow, Caleb." "Perfect," he said, his cheerfulness returning, a terrifying mask. "Looking forward to it, Mom. Love you." "Love you too," I lied, the words tasting like ash. I hung up the phone, carefully placing the receiver back in its cradle as if it were a fragile, dangerous thing. The silence that followed was deafening. Frank and I just stared at each other, our faces pale, our eyes wide with unspeakable horror. There was no need for words. The truth, finally, was out in the open, raw and terrifying. Caleb wasn't just a thief or a murderer from the past. He was an active, present danger. He was coming for us, and he had just invited us to our own demise. For a long time after I hung up the phone, neither of us moved. The house, our fortress for 40 years, suddenly felt like a cage. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like an approaching footstep. "We'll call the police," Frank finally whispered, his voice hoarse. "We'll tell them everything. About Leo. About this phone call. We can't go." I looked at my husband, at the raw terror in his eyes, and a cold, hard clarity washed over me. The woman who avoided conflict at all costs was gone, burned away by the horrible truth. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone willing to stare into the abyss. "And what will we tell them, Frank?" I asked, my own voice quiet but firm. "That our successful, well-loved son invited us for a hike and we think he might want to kill us? What evidence do we have? Your 5-year-old confession? A confession that makes you an accomplice to covering up a murder? They'll think you're a grieving, senile old man. Or worse, they'll question you, and Caleb will hear about it. And then what?" The unspoken answer hung in the air between us. Then he wouldn't need to bother with the pretense of an accident, a gas leak in the middle of the night, a brake line conveniently cut, a robbery that looks just a little too perfect. If we refuse, we don't save ourselves. We just change the time and place of our execution to one of his choosing. The terrible logic settled over him, and I saw the last bit of hope drain from his face. "So what do we do?" he breathed. "We just walk into the trap." "Yes," I said, the word tasting like poison. "We walk into the trap, but we do it on our terms. We go with him to that mountain, and we make sure that if we don't walk back down, the world knows exactly why." We were whispering now, huddled together in our own kitchen like fugitives. The secret that had shattered our marriage just an hour before was now the only thing holding us together. We were no longer husband and wife. We were allies in a war we never knew we were fighting. Frank, ever the builder, the man who thinks in terms of structure and tools, was the first to formulate a practical idea. He pulled out his smartphone, his rough carpenter's hands surprisingly deft on the screen. "There's an app," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. "It can record audio, even when the phone is locked and the screen is dark. I'll put it in the breast pocket of my jacket. The microphone will pick up everything. Evidence. A record. A voice from the grave if it came to that." My own mind was racing, latching onto a memory. "Sarah," I breathed. Frank looked at me, confused. "Sarah gave me a gift a few years ago, a silly gag gift for my birthday." I hurried to my bedroom, my heart pounding. I rummaged through the back of my jewelry box, my fingers searching past 40 years of earrings and necklaces until they closed around a small plastic square, a GPS tracker, tiny, with a long-lasting battery. Sarah had laughed when she gave it to me. "For when you lose Frank in the lumber aisle at Home Depot," she joked. Now, it felt like the most important object I had ever owned. I took Frank's favorite hiking jacket from the hall closet, the one I knew he would wear. With a needle and thread from my sewing kit, my hands moving with a strange, steady purpose, I carefully opened a seam in the collar lining. I slipped the small tracker inside, its cold, smooth surface a secret promise against my fingertips, and sewed the seam shut with tiny, invisible stitches. It was a simple domestic act, one I had performed 100 times before on torn hems and loose buttons, but this time I wasn't mending cloth. I was weaving a lifeline. When I was done, we stood in the hallway, our desperate, whispered plan complete. We had our tools, a voice, and a location. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was everything. Frank took my hand, his grip tight, his palm calloused and familiar. We weren't the young couple in the wedding photos anymore. We were two old soldiers, steeling ourselves for one last, impossible battle. "I have to call him back," I said. He nodded, his throat tight. I walked back to the phone, took a deep, shuddering breath, and dialed Caleb's number. When he answered, I forced a warmth I didn't feel into my voice, a cheerful lilt that felt like a betrayal to every terrified cell in my body. "Hi, sweetie, it's Mom," I said. "We'd love to go. A hike sounds like a wonderful idea." The week leading up to the hike was the longest of my life. Frank and I lived like ghosts in our own home, speaking in whispers, starting at every sound. We were performers rehearsing for the most important role of our lives, the happy, oblivious parents. We smiled. We made plans for the garden. We lied. Every night, I would lie awake in the dark, feeling the tiny, hard square of the GPS tracker hidden in my bedside table, a cold and secret comfort. Saturday came, as we knew it would. It was a beautiful, crisp autumn day, the kind of day that mocks you with its perfection when your world is ending. As Frank put on his hiking jacket, I watched him discreetly touch the collar, a silent acknowledgement of the tiny secret stitched within. He caught my eye and gave a slow, deliberate nod. We were ready. Caleb's Land Rover pulled into our driveway at exactly 9 o'clock. He and Brooke stepped out, radiating a vibrant, healthy energy that seemed obscene. Brooke was dressed in stylish, expensive hiking gear, looking like she'd stepped out of a catalog. Caleb was all smiles, clapping his father on the back. "Ready for an adventure, you two?" he asked, his voice booming with false heartiness. The car ride was a masterclass in psychological torture. Frank and I were prisoners in the plush leather back seat while Brooke, in the passenger seat, played the role of tour guide to hell. She put on a playlist of upbeat pop songs from our youth, singing along terribly, her voice a shrill counterpoint to the silent scream in my head. "Oh, look, Ellie!" she'd exclaim, pointing out the window. "There's that little antique shop you love. We should go next week." Next week. The words were a casual, cruel twist of the knife. She filled every available pocket of silence with breathless chatter, while Caleb drove with a focused, almost rigid calm. I watched him in the rearview mirror. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. A little muscle jumped in his jaw, the only crack in his perfect facade. As we'd gotten into the car, I'd seen Frank, with a slight cough to cover the movement, tap his chest pocket, confirming the phone was on and recording. The microphone was listening. The trap was set. We arrived at the trailhead at Blackwood Ridge. The air was cool and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It was breathtakingly beautiful. I remember thinking how cruel it was to be surrounded by so much life and natural beauty on the day I was supposed to die. The hike began pleasantly enough, on a wide, well-maintained path, but their performance was relentless. "Need some water, Mom?" Caleb would ask, stopping every 15 minutes. "Let me help you over that rock, Ellie." Brooke would insist, grabbing my arm with a grip that was just a little too tight. Their concern was a suffocating blanket. They weren't caring for us. They were managing us, moving us along the trail like livestock, ensuring the merchandise arrived at its destination in good condition. Image looking up a steep, wooded hiking trail from the hiker's perspective. As we climbed higher, the trail grew steeper and more rugged. My lungs began to burn, and Frank's breathing grew labored. We were two 60-year-olds, not seasoned hikers, and our exhaustion was real. It made us vulnerable, and they knew it. I could see Caleb and Brooke exchange a quick, knowing glance. "It's working," the look seemed to say. "They're getting tired." I focused on the details around me, burning them into my memory. The gnarled root that looked like a grasping hand, a distinctive, lightning-scarred birch tree, the sharp cry of a hawk circling high above. If by some miracle I survived, I wanted to be able to tell the police exactly where to walk. After about an hour of grueling climbing, Brooke, who was a few yards ahead, suddenly stopped and clapped her hands together. "Oh my gosh, you guys, look!" she called out, pointing off the main trail to a narrow, overgrown path. "That little path over there, I bet it leads to an incredible view. The main lookout is still a ways up. Why don't we just pop over there and take the anniversary photos now?" My heart stopped. This was it. This was the place. It wasn't a marked scenic point. It was an isolated, rocky outcrop, a place no one would accidentally wander to. It was a stage, perfectly chosen for a private performance. "Come on," Caleb urged, already moving toward the turnoff, a new, eager light in his eyes. "The best views are always off the beaten path." Frank's hand found mine, his fingers cold and trembling. He gave my hand one hard, final squeeze. I looked at my husband, the man I had loved for 40 years, the man with whom I'd shared a life of secrets and sorrows, and I squeezed back. There were no words left to say. This was the end of the long walk up, The path was barely a path at all, just a thin, treacherous line of dirt and loose rock cutting through thorny bushes. It opened up suddenly onto a wide, flat ledge of granite that jutted out over the valley. The view was, as Caleb had promised, spectacular. Miles of autumn-colored forest stretched out below us, a river snaking through it like a silver ribbon. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen, and I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that it had been chosen as my grave. The wind was stronger up here, pulling at my clothes, a constant, mournful whisper in my ears. The drop was sheer. I didn't let my eyes linger on the jagged rocks I could see clustered at the bottom, 100 feet below. "Oh, this is it! This is perfect!" Brooke chirped, her voice giddy and unnaturally loud in the open air. She unzipped her pack and pulled out a professional-looking camera. "Okay, you two, anniversary portrait time. Stand right over there, near the edge. I want to get that gorgeous valley in the background." She pointed to a spot no sane person would choose to stand. It was inches from the precipice. Frank and I moved slowly, our bodies stiff with a terror we were trying desperately to hide. I could feel the solid warmth of his hand in mine, a small anchor in a world that was about to fall away. "Closer together now, look at each other. Look like you've been married for 40 years, she directed, snapping a few photos. The click of the shutter felt like a countdown. "Okay, great. Now, for the grand finale, I want one of you both looking out over the valley. Backs to me. It'll be so artistic." She was positioning us, turning our backs to our killer. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. We did as she said, turning to face the vast emptiness. I squeezed Frank's hand, my knuckles white. "This is it. I love you." The message passed between us, a silent, final vow. "Perfect." Brooke's voice called from behind us. "Just hold that." We waited. The click of the camera never came. Instead, the silence was broken by a new voice. Her voice. But it was a voice I had never heard before. All the fake warmth, all the sugary sweetness, was gone. What was left was flat, cold, and full of contempt. "You know," she said, "you should have just signed the papers, Mom. It would have been so much easier." The word Mom was a deliberate, final insult. I felt Frank's whole body tense beside me. We started to turn, but it was too late. I heard the frantic scrabble of shoes on gravel and then Caleb's voice, a guttural roar of pure rage. "You never listen," he screamed, and then he was on us. He didn't just push. He lunged, his body a missile of greed and desperation, aiming his full weight at his father. But Frank was ready. My husband, the quiet carpenter, met his son's attack with a strength I hadn't seen in him for years. He twisted at the last second, grabbing the front of Caleb's jacket. "Not again!" Frank roared, his voice ripped from the deepest part of his soul. "You won't have him too, you monster!" For a horrifying, surreal moment, the three of us were locked in a terrible dance on the precipice. Caleb clawed at his father, trying to break his grip. Frank held on with the desperate strength of a man atoning for a lifetime of silence. I was tangled with them, my arms flailing, trying to pull Frank back, trying to push Caleb away. Then Brooke screamed a shriek of fury, not fear, and she lunged forward to help her husband, adding her weight to the deadly equation. The loose gravel under our feet gave way. I felt that sickening, stomach-lurching sensation of a balance point being lost forever. Gravity, patient and inevitable, took over. We were a tangled knot of limbs and screams, teetering for an impossible second on the edge of the world, and then we fell. The wind rushed past my ears, a deafening roar. The sky and the earth became a spinning, incomprehensible blur. My arm was still tangled with Frank's, and in that last, terrible eternity, all I could think of was his hand in mine, the feel of his wedding ring against my skin. The ground didn't rise up to meet me. It exploded. There was a sound like the world splitting in two, a symphony of snapping bone and shattering rock. Then, a silent, starless, all-consuming black. Consciousness returned not like a light switching on, but like a slow, agonizing tide seeping into a land of blackness. The first thing I knew was the taste, thick, coppery, and foul, the taste of my own blood. Then came the smell of dust and damp stone, and then, all at once, the pain. It was a universe of pain, a supernova of agony that erupted in my left leg and sent searing shockwaves through every inch of my body. My head throbbed with a deep, percussive rhythm, and every shallow breath was a fresh stab of fire in my ribs. I felt the rough scrape of gravel against my cheek. I was alive. The realization wasn't a comfort. It was a fresh wave of horror. To be alive was to feel this. A primal scream built in my throat, a desperate need to cry out, to move, to do anything to escape the torment. But before I could make a sound, another noise cut through the fog. A voice. It was so faint, so broken, it was little more than a rattling breath from somewhere nearby. Ellie. Frank. Don't. Move. The words were ghosts, barely there. Play. Dead. The command was so insane, so impossible, that it shocked me into stillness. Play dead. Lie here, in this shattered body, and pretend to be a corpse. The instinct to survive, a force I never knew I possessed, took over. I let the scream die in my throat. I forced my muscles, which were twitching in agony, to go limp. I let my eyes, which had fluttered open, fall half shut, my gaze unfocused and glassy. I regulated my breathing, taking in tiny, imperceptible sips of air. Every second was a battle against a screaming chorus of nerve endings. A few yards away, I heard a groan. It was Brooke. "My leg," she whimpered, her voice sharp with pain. "Oh God, Caleb, I think my leg is broken." Then Caleb's voice, rough and strained. "Mine too. Ankles shattered. Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay," she shrieked. "Look at us. This wasn't supposed to happen." "It worked, didn't it?" he rasped. "Just be quiet for a second. I have to check on them." My heart hammered against my broken ribs. I heard the sickening sound of someone dragging themselves across the rocks, getting closer. "Don't breathe. Don't flinch. Play dead." The words were a frantic mantra in my mind. A shadow fell over me. I could feel his presence looming, smell the faint scent of his cologne. I felt his fingers, clumsy and shaking, press against the side of my neck, searching for a pulse. It was the most terrifying moment of my life, a violation so profound it eclipsed the physical pain. I forced my body to remain utterly still. After an eternity, he moved away. I heard him crawl over to where Frank was lying. Another agonizing pause. "They're gone," Caleb finally announced, his voice flat with a chilling finality. "Both of them. Their necks are broken. They're not breathing." He was lying. Or, in Frank's case, he was a bad doctor. My husband's ruse had worked. Brooke let out a sound that was half a sob, half a sigh of profound relief. "Oh, thank God," she whispered. "It's over." The raw, naked truth of those words hit me harder than the fall. It wasn't a tragedy for them. It was a victory. Image from a low angle, looking up at the sky from a rocky ravine floor. "Okay," Caleb said, his voice gaining a new businesslike focus. "Listen to me. We stick to the story. We practiced it. What happened?" "Dad slipped," Brooke recited, her voice a monotone, as if reading from a script. "He slipped on the loose rocks near the edge while I was taking a picture. He grabbed for Mom, and his weight pulled her down with him. And us," Caleb prompted. "We lunged to save them," she continued. "We both grabbed for them, but we lost our balance and went over too. It's a miracle we're alive. We're the tragic, traumatized survivors." "The phone," Caleb muttered. "My phone smashed. Yours. Still in my pack, I think," she grunted with effort. "This is going to hurt." "Okay. We crawl from here. Uphill. We find a spot with a signal, and we call 911. We cry. A lot. We tell them our parents are dead." Then Caleb's voice, filled with a satisfaction that was purely monstrous. "And then we're free. The house, the savings, everything. We can finally pay off those sharks, Brooke. We can actually live the life we're supposed to." Lying there, broken and bleeding, pretending to be dead, I listened as my son and his wife planned the rest of their lives on the foundation of our corpses. They weren't just murderers. They were vultures, calmly discussing how best to pick our bones clean. A new feeling began to smolder beneath the pain and the fear. It was cold, and it was patient. It was rage. And I knew then that I would endure any amount of pain. I would lie here for an eternity if I had to, for the chance to see the looks on their faces when they realized the dead could still talk. The silence after they left was absolute. For how long, I don't know. Time had lost its meaning, measured only by the rhythm of my own ragged breaths and the waves of pain that washed over me. Frank and I lay there, two broken figures in a rocky grave, united by our terrible secret. We were alive, but our survival depended on everyone believing we were dead. Eventually, the sound of the world returned. First, it was the far-off thrum of a helicopter, a sound that grew steadily from a faint pulse to a deafening roar overhead. Then came voices, clear and authoritative, echoing down the walls of the ravine. Help had arrived. Our murderers had made their call. From my half-lidded, glassy-eyed perspective, the rescue was a disorienting ballet of ropes, harnesses, and concerned faces. Paramedics in bright uniforms descended like angels into our hell. As they worked, their voices were a low murmur of medical jargon. No response. Weak, thready, pulse on the male. Female is unresponsive, GCS is low. They were professionals, seeing only trauma, not betrayal. As they strapped me into a stretcher, I could hear Brooke's performance from the clifftop above. She was delivering an Oscar-worthy monologue of grief, her sobs perfectly timed, her voice choked with anguish. It was so fast, she wailed to one of the rescuers. My poor parents-in-law. We tried to save them. We really did. The ascent was a dizzying, swaying journey back into the world of the living. As I was lifted over the edge, I caught a glimpse of Caleb. He had a bandage on his head and was leaning on a paramedic, his face a perfect mask of grief-stricken shock. He was watching me, his eyes cold and assessing, making sure the job was done. The flight to the hospital was a blur of noise and urgency. They worked on Frank, whose injuries were clearly more severe than mine. I focused on his whispered command, "Play dead." I let my body be a dead weight. I was a package of broken bones and secrets, to be delivered and processed. The emergency room was controlled chaos. I was wheeled into a cubicle, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the urgent, calm voices of doctors and nurses. They cut away my clothes, poked and prodded, and put an IV in my arm. Through it all, I remained limp, a silent passenger in my own broken body. Hours later, I was in a quiet room in the ICU. A doctor came in and spoke in low tones to a nurse. I caught phrases: severe concussion, multiple fractures, prognosis is guarded. Eventually, they allowed Caleb and Brooke to see me. They had been treated for their own injuries, a broken leg for Brooke, a shattered ankle for Caleb. He hobbled into the room on crutches, his face etched with a convincing sorrow. A young nurse with kind eyes and a name tag that read, Chloe, was quietly checking the readings on my heart monitor. "Mom," Caleb whispered, approaching the bed. He took my limp hand in his. His touch was reptilian. "Mom, if you can hear me, I'm so sorry. I love you." The words were for the nurse. A perfect little performance. Brooke sobbed quietly from the doorway. Then he leaned closer, his face just inches from mine, his breath warm and foul. He lowered his voice to a venomous whisper, meant only for the ears of a dying woman. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Mom," he hissed, his voice a thread of pure poison. "Some truths are better left buried. Just like Leo," he had confessed. He had connected this attack to his first murder, and someone else was in the room. My eyes, through their narrow slits, flickered to the nurse. I saw her body go rigid. I saw her hand, which had been adjusting a dial, freeze in midair. I saw her eyes widen for a fraction of a second in shock and horror. She had heard it. She knew those were not the words of a grieving son. Caleb straightened up, squeezing my hand one last time before turning to leave. "We'll let you rest now," he said, his public voice back in place. This was it. This was my only chance. It might be the last chance I ever got. As he hobbled away, and before Nurse Chloe could unfreeze, I summoned every particle of will, every ounce of strength that wasn't consumed by pain. I focused it all into the index finger of the hand that lay on the starchy white sheet. It was a tiny movement, a barely perceptible twitch, a desperate, silent scream for help. My gaze was locked on Chloe. I saw her eyes, which had been staring in horror at Caleb's retreating back, flicker down to my hand. Her brow furrowed in confusion. For a heart-stopping second, she just stared. Did she see it? Or was it too small? A trick of the light, just another tremor in a dying body. Time seemed to stop. My entire world, my entire hope for survival, was balanced on the razor's edge of that one tiny movement. I watched as Nurse Chloe's eyes, full of a dawning, horrified understanding, met mine. For a second, I saw fear in her face, and my heart sank. Was she too afraid to get involved? Would she dismiss it, write it off, and leave me to my fate? But then her expression hardened into one of professional resolve. She gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a gesture so small that anyone else would have missed it. Without a word, she went back to checking the monitor, her movements calm and deliberate. To anyone watching, she was just a nurse doing her job. To me, she was a warrior girding for battle. After a few more moments that stretched into an eternity, she moved to my bedside, pretending to adjust my IV drip. She leaned in close, her mouth near my ear, her voice a fierce, protective whisper. "Mrs. Vance," she breathed. "I saw that. I heard what he said. I am going to get help. Do not move. Do not react. Keep pretending until I get back. You are not alone." She straightened up and walked out of the room with a calm, unhurried pace that belied the urgency of her mission. I was left alone with the steady, rhythmic beeping of the machine that was measuring my life, praying that this stranger, this angel in scrubs, would be my salvation. The wait was the purest form of torture. Every footstep in the hallway made my heart leap. Was it Caleb coming back to finish the job? Had he seen the look on Chloe's face? My mind created 1,000 terrible scenarios. Finally, the door opened. It was Chloe, and she was not alone. Flanked by a stern-looking older doctor and 2 uniformed police officers, she walked toward my bed. The relief was so powerful, so absolute, it was a physical force. It took everything I had not to burst into tears. "Mrs. Vance," said one of the officers, a detective with tired, kind eyes. His name tag read, "Johnson." "My name is Detective Johnson. Nurse Chloe has told us a very disturbing story. We need to know if it's true. We are here to protect you. If you are able to, and if what the nurse has told us is true, I need you to open your eyes." Slowly, painfully, I peeled my heavy eyelids open. The fluorescent light of the hospital room was blinding, but the sight of those 3 figures standing by my bed, my angel and my saviors, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Oh, thank God," Chloe murmured, her hand flying to her mouth. My own voice, when it came, was a dry, rasping croak, the voice of a ghost. "My son," I whispered. "Caleb, his wife, Brooke, they pushed us." Then, the most important words of my life. "My husband, Frank, his phone. It's in his jacket. He recorded everything." Detective Johnson's eyes sharpened. He didn't question me. He didn't doubt me. He simply nodded and said to his partner, "Stay here. Secure this room." Then he turned to Chloe. "Take me to her husband's room. Now." They left, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't pretending. I was just a survivor, waiting. A few minutes later, Detective Johnson's voice crackled through the officer's radio on his shoulder. It was faint, but I could hear it. "Have the device in hand. The husband is conscious and confirms the entire story. The recording is explicit. Get ready to move." They're in the main surgical waiting room. And then I heard it all, a real-time drama playing out over the police radio. I could picture the scene perfectly. Caleb and Brooke, surrounded by other worried families, performing their roles as grieving children. I heard the detective's firm, clear voice cutting through the waiting room chatter. "Caleb Vance? Brooke Vance." A pause. Then Brooke's confused, innocent voice. "Yes? Can we help you, officer? You're both under arrest for the attempted murder of Eleanor and Frank Vance." The radio crackled. I could hear a collective gasp from the other people in the waiting room. "You are also being brought in for questioning regarding the death of Leo Vance, 25 years ago." The name Leo was the key that unlocked their panic. The first scream was from Brooke. It was a wild, hysterical shriek. "It wasn't me! It was him! It was all his idea! He was desperate. He owed money. He made me do it. Then Caleb's voice, a roar of pure, cornered animal rage. You lying witch! The cliff was your idea. You said it had to look perfect. You planned everything. It was the unraveling. Their monstrous alliance, built on years of shared secrets and greed, disintegrated in a matter of seconds under the fluorescent lights of a public hospital. They clawed at each other with accusations, each one trying to save themselves by sacrificing the other, their ugly truths spilling out for the whole world to hear. A while later, Detective Johnson came back into my room. He looked tired, but his eyes held a grim satisfaction. They're in custody, he said quietly. They confessed to just about everything on the way to the car, screaming at each other the whole time. It's over, Mrs. Vance. You're safe now. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since that terrible phone call, the tears finally came. They weren't tears of pain or of fear. They were tears of overwhelming, impossible relief. The unraveling was complete. The whispers in the dark had finally been dragged into the light. The days that followed the arrest were a strange, surreal blur. The immediate, life-or-death terror was gone, but in its place settled a deep, bone-wearying exhaustion. Frank was in a room down the hall from me, both of us beginning the slow, painful process of mending our broken bodies. But the physical recovery was the easy part. The harder part was navigating the wreckage of our lives. Our story had become a local media sensation, the Blackwood Ridge betrayal, they were calling it. Our quiet, private life had been turned into a public spectacle of horror. Sarah, a constant, grounding presence, helped us find a lawyer. We expected someone gentle, someone who would hold our hands and speak in sympathetic tones. What we got was Anya Sharma. Miss Sharma was a woman who seemed to be made of sharp angles and caffeinated energy. She walked into my hospital room, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase that looked more formidable than a weapon. She was young, maybe mid-30s, with an intense, unblinking gaze that missed nothing. She did not offer condolences. She offered a plan. "Let's be clear, Mr. and Mrs. Vance," she said, addressing both Frank and me as we sat in my room, Frank in a wheelchair beside my bed. Her voice was crisp and devoid of sentiment. "Your case is both a prosecutor's dream and a defense attorney's playground. The audio recording from your husband's phone is a confession, plain and simple. It's our primary weapon, and it's a powerful one." She opened her briefcase and laid out a file. "However," she continued, her sharp gaze moving between us, "the defense will not be arguing the facts of the fall. They'll be arguing the why. They will paint your son and his wife as desperate, loving children pushed to a single, tragic mistake by crushing financial pressure. They will try to make a jury feel sorry for them. Sorry for them." Frank's voice was a low growl. "Yes," Miss Sharma said, unfazed, "and they will use you, Mr. Vance. They will paint you as an unreliable narrator, a man who covered up the truth about one son's death for 25 years. They will ask the jury, if he lied then, why should you believe him now? We need to be prepared for that." It was a brutal, cold assessment, but it was honest. There was no sugarcoating, no false comfort. For the first time, I understood the long, ugly road that lay ahead. Then she slid a new set of papers across the bedside table. "This is the preliminary financial investigation from the police. I wanted you to see it." I read the report, and the full, sordid picture of my son's life came into focus. It was worse than Sarah had imagined. Caleb's business was a hollow shell, more than $200,000 in debt. But it wasn't just to banks. The report listed several private lenders' loan sharks with interest rates that were designed to break people. He was being crushed. But that wasn't the worst of it. The police had found forged documents, loan applications in Frank's name, with his signature expertly faked. Attempts to access our retirement accounts, blocked only by security protocols. He hadn't just been planning to inherit our money after we died. He had been actively stealing from us while we were alive, smiling at us across the dinner table. The son I had agonized over, the one I felt guilty for enabling, was far more of a predator than I had ever allowed myself to believe. "He was cornered," Miss Sharma stated, watching me process the information. "You weren't just a convenience, Mrs. Vance. Your assets were his only way out." Your deaths were a necessary part of his business plan. As if that wasn't enough to bear, she brought up the final, most heartbreaking piece of the puzzle. And then there is the matter of your grandchildren, she said, her voice softening for the first time. Mia and Noah. They are currently in the temporary custody of the state. Child Protective Services. The words hit me like a physical blow. My innocent grandchildren, swept up in this nightmare. Can we see them? I asked, my voice cracking. Soon, she assured me. But we need to start thinking about the long term. Given the circumstances, you are the obvious choice for permanent custody. But it will be a fight. The state will need to be convinced that you are emotionally and physically capable. It's another battle you'll have to face. I looked at Frank, at his tired, broken face, and then down at my own arm, encased in a plaster cast. We were 2 wounded soldiers, and they were asking us to prepare for another war this time, for the lives of our son's children. After Miss Sharma left, the room was quiet. The relief I had felt after the arrest had evaporated, replaced by the cold, heavy weight of reality. Surviving the fall wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. We'll do it, I said to Frank, my voice filled with a resolve I didn't know I had. We'll fight. For Leo, for us, and for those kids. The price of justice was going to be high. But for the first time, I was ready to pay it. The 6 months leading up to the trial were a grueling marathon of physical therapy, psychological evaluations, and endless meetings with Anya Sharma. We fought for and were granted temporary custody of Mia and Noah, our beautiful, confused grandchildren who only knew that their parents had gone away. Our lives became a landscape of quiet grief and fierce, protective love for these 2 innocent souls caught in the wreckage. The day I had to walk into that courtroom, my legs still aching with a permanent, dull throb, was one of the hardest of my life. The room was cold and impersonal, all polished wood and stern flags, a sterile environment for a story so steeped in blood and betrayal. I saw Caleb and Brooke at the defendant's table. They were thinner, paler, their confident glow extinguished. Their lawyers had dressed them in conservative clothes, trying to package them as a respectable young couple who had made a terrible mistake. They looked like strangers, which, I realized, is exactly what they were. Frank's testimony was agonizing. Just as Anya had predicted, their defense attorney tried to tear him apart, portraying him as a liar, a coward, an accomplice who had hidden the truth for his own selfish reasons. Frank held his ground, his voice heavy with a guilt he would carry forever. But he never wavered. He told the truth, and it cost him dearly. Then, it was my turn. As I took the stand, I had to walk right past my son. I forced myself to look at him. I was searching for something, a flicker of remorse, a shadow of the little boy I had raised. I found nothing. His eyes were cold, empty, a stranger's eyes filled with a resentful fury that I was the one still breathing. The prosecutor was kind, guiding me through the story, from the anniversary party to the whispers in the ravine. But the cross-examination was brutal. Caleb's lawyer tried to paint me as a confused, grieving mother, twisting my love for my son into a motive for misremembering the facts. But the final moment was mine. The prosecutor, on his redirect, asked me one last question. "Mrs. Vance," he said gently, "after everything that has happened, how do you see the man sitting at that table?" I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I spoke directly to the shell of my son. "I've learned that a mother can lose a son more than once," I said, my voice clear and steady, echoing in the silent courtroom. 25 years ago, I lost Leo, my bright, honest boy. His death shattered our family. But the day I learned the truth in that workshop, I realized I lost Caleb that night too. "The person sitting over there," I said, my gaze locked on his. "He is a stranger to me. A stranger who borrowed my son's face for 25 years while he hollowed out our family from the inside. I don't hate him. I have nothing left for him. I am just mourning the sons I no longer have." The jury was out for 2 days. It was the longest 48 hours of my life. When they finally filed back in, their faces grim and unreadable, the courtroom was so quiet I could hear my own heart beating. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, handed the verdict to the clerk. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree," the clerk read, his voice ringing out, We, the jury, find the defendant, Caleb Vance, guilty. A choked sob escaped my lips. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Brooke Vance, guilty. Brooke collapsed into hysterical, wailing sobs. Caleb just stared straight ahead, his face slack with disbelief, the mask of the successful son finally, irrevocably gone. The judge sentenced them both to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. Justice, paid for in blood and secrets, had finally been served. Later, after the storm of reporters had passed, we found Anya Sharma packing her briefcase in a quiet hallway. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We couldn't have done this without you." "You're the ones who did it," she replied, her tone still professional, but the hard edge was gone. She looked at us, truly looked at us, for the first time. "I fight hard for all my clients, but I'll admit, this case was different for me." She paused, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the same pain I felt reflected in her own eyes. "When I was 15, she said quietly, "my grandfather died. He left the family business to my mother and her brother, 50-50. My uncle, a man I adored, systematically forged documents and embezzled funds until my mother was left with nothing but debt. He destroyed her. I watched her lose everything because she couldn't believe her own brother would betray her." She snapped her briefcase shut. "I decided then that I would spend my life fighting for people like my mom, people who are blindsided by the one thing they should be able to trust, family. So, thank you, Mrs. Vance, for being strong enough to tell the truth." And with that, she gave us a small, sad smile and walked away. I stood there, stunned, realizing her fight hadn't just been professional. It had been a personal vow. Our tragedy was not unique. It was a story as old as time, and in that cold courthouse hallway, in that moment of unexpected grace, I felt a profound, heartbreaking connection to a stranger, and I knew our healing could finally begin. It's been a year since the verdict, Saturday, October 4th, 2025, a year of quiet healing, of learning to breathe again. Frank and I finalized the adoption of Mia and Noah 6 months ago. Our house, once so silent and heavy with secrets, is now a chaotic, beautiful mess of scattered toys, half-finished drawings, and the sound of children's laughter. Some days, the exhaustion of being parents again in our 60s is so profound it feels like a physical weight. But every morning, when Noah crawls into our bed for a cuddle, or when Mia reads a story to me, her small face serious with concentration, I know we are exactly where we need to be. We are building a new life from the rubble of the old one. The scars, of course, will always be there. There are nights when I wake up from a dream of falling, my heart pounding in my chest. There are moments when Frank will stand in his workshop, staring at an old tool, and I know he is thinking of Leo. We don't talk about Caleb or Brooke anymore. Their names are ghosts that we have lovingly, firmly guided out of our home. Their memory is a wound that is no longer open, but has healed into a tender, permanent scar. I am standing now in the doorway of the workshop, watching Frank. The afternoon sun streams through the window, just as it always has, illuminating the dancing dust motes that smell of pine and history. This space, once the keeper of our family's most devastating secret, is slowly becoming a place of healing. Frank is not alone at his workbench. Mia, our bright, curious 8-year-old granddaughter, stands on a small stool beside him. Her dark hair is pulled back in a messy ponytail, a dusting of sawdust on her cheek. In her small hands, she holds a block of smooth, pale maple. Frank's large, calloused hand rests gently over hers, guiding her movements as she sands the wood. "Slowly now," I hear him say, his voice softer than I have heard it in years. "You have to go with the grain, sweetheart. Never fight it. The wood will tell you which way it wants to go. That's where it's strongest." I watch them. My heart a strange, aching mix of profound sorrow and overwhelming love. I see the echoes of the past everywhere. I see a phantom of a young Leo, laughing as he learned this same lesson. I see the ghost of a sullen, resentful Caleb rushing through his work, always fighting the grain. The workshop holds all of it, all the love, the lies, the talent, and the tragedy. But then Noah, our energetic 6-year-old, comes tearing out the back door, a crayon drawing clutched in his hand. "Grandpa, look! I drew your hammer." Frank turns and scoops him up in his free arm, settling him on his hip. He inspects the drawing with the solemn gravity only a grandfather can muster. "Well now, that's the finest hammer I've ever seen," he declares. Mia holds up her block of wood, her face glowing with pride. "Feel how smooth it is, Grandma," she calls, finally spotting me in the doorway. "Grandpa says I have the magic touch." I smile, a real, unburdened smile, and walk into the light-filled space. I run my hand over the wood she offers me. It's perfect. Frank winks at me over Noah's head, his eyes clear for the first time in a long time. The echoes of the past are still here. They always will be. But today, in this place of creation, the joyful sounds of the present are finally, beautifully, louder. We are a new family, misshapen by tragedy, but being sanded smooth by love and time. And for the first time, I believe with all my heart, we are going with the grain. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's not an easy one to tell, and it's taken a long, painful time to find the words. When I look back on everything that happened, the biggest lesson I've learned is a difficult one. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals come from the people you are taught to trust the most. For years, I believed that being a good mother meant keeping the peace at all costs, but I've learned that peace without truth is just a prettier kind of prison. I've learned that love should not be a transaction, and that you should never have to prove your trust by signing away your security. The most important lesson, the one I carry with me every day, is that no is a complete sentence, and setting a boundary isn't an act of cruelty, it is a vital act of self-preservation. To protect the privacy of my grandchildren and others involved, some of the names and smaller details in this story have been changed, but the emotions, the betrayals, and the lessons learned are all painfully real. Now, I would be so grateful to hear from you. My story is about the ultimate family betrayal, but I know the seeds of it were planted years earlier, in small moments where I chose peace over confrontation. So I want to ask you all, have you ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong in your family, even when everything looked perfect on the surface? How do you draw the line between helping your loved ones and enabling a behavior that could hurt everyone in the long run? Please, share your own stories and your wisdom in the comments below. I will be reading them. Thank you for being here with me. Take care of yourselves and each other.